of African Americans and Hispanics is the product of two perverse economic incentives. One, a privatized prison industry whose financial success is dependent upon greater numbers of prisoners serving lengthier sentences. And two, the availability of a slave labor pool to corporate America. He cites a number of corporations in at least 37 different states that take advantage of this so-called prison labor. Companies such as IBM, Boeing, Motorola, Microsoft, AT&T, Target, and so forth. Between 1980 and 1994, profits from prison labor soared from $392 million to $1.3 billion. And while some inmates receive minimum wage, in privately run prisons, it's reported they receive as little as 17 cents per hour. Pelez's article over Global Research quotes Kevin Mannix, the former chairman of the Oregon GOP, underscoring how this form of labor has furnished an attractive alternative to outsourcing. Mannix recently urged Nike to cut its production in Indonesia and bring it to his state, telling the shoe manufacturer that there won't be any transportation costs. We're offering you competitive prison labor here. That's a quote. That's something to bear in mind next time you hear a Republican crowing about jobs creation in this country. In short, legalization poses a direct, this is talking about drug legalization, poses a direct threat to corporate America's bottom line, Canning reported at bradblog.com. End the war on drugs and you deplete the available pool of prison slave labor, as well as the profitability of private prisons. But there's another element to all of this. Late last week at Huffington Post, Washington Bureau Chief Ryan Grimm reported on another disturbing aspect or two of the privatized prison industrial complex. He writes, Mississippi jails are losing inmates and local officials are devastated by the loss of revenue. He quotes one county supervisor noting that if they do not send our inmates back, we can't make it. That's right. Over the past several decades, many states and counties have come to count on revenue brought in by housing prisoners, particularly in many of these so-called conservative areas where officials continue to lower taxes for the wealthy or otherwise refuse to raise taxes to meet the needs of residents. The decreasing number of prisoners, particularly as sentences for minor, nonviolent drug crimes are being lifted, are beginning to hurt the bottom lines of official state and county budgets around the country. Joining us now to talk about this is Huffington Post Washington Bureau Chief Ryan Grimm. Hey, Ryan, welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thanks for having me on.
So, your story in Mississippi is enlightening, and I think it's really about much more than Mississippi ultimately. But what the hell is happening here? You're writing about Mississippi, and I suspect this is an issue we're likely to see elsewhere. How did this reliance on income from prison population get started in Mississippi in the first place?
So in the late 90s, the state was facing massive overcrowding issues, as the era of mass incarceration was really, hitting its peak and starting to plateau there. And so the state reached out to the counties and said, we would love to help you build regional facilities, and we will then send you state prisoners. So you'll get, 35 to 45 full-time jobs here, and you'll get the construction jobs that come along with building the prison, and we'll promise to keep the prisons filled at an 80% capacity. Now, they also promised that they would give a 3% per diem increase, year over year to help cover the costs of the prisoners. After a couple years, they stopped doing that, and they said, well, look, we've got so many prisoners, we'll just keep pushing you up over the 80% number, so that's gravy for you. You got empty beds, we're going to fill them, and every time we fill them, you get money. And so the county said, okay, that's fine.
So they actually changed. They promised they would get 3% more money each and every year, and then suddenly that changed. Was that through legislation? Did they just stop paying that? What
they just stopped paying it, and now some of the counties are talking about suing to try to get it back.
Okay, but they had guaranteed that there would be at least 80% occupation, so to make up for it, they just sent them more prisoners, and so they made the same amount of money.
And so in the last few weeks, now that the prison population has shrank, the reverse of what was happening 10 years ago, where everybody was fighting to offload prisoners because everybody was overcrowded. Now they're fighting to keep their beds filled with these bodies, so that they can then be the ones that get the credit for the revenue that comes along with them.
As you can tell, to change the deal just because they're the state, or is that one of the point of contentions here that they may be suing over?
I mean, they're still meeting their 80%.
Okay.
And the commissioner called the deal a wink and a nod deal, the above 80% part, and said that, I'm not obligated to, to stick by any wink and a nod deal that I didn't have anything to do with. So if they want to fight for the 3%, then they're going to have to go to court over it.
You write in your piece at Huffington Post, Ryan Grimm, that as the wave of mass incarceration, this is the mass incarceration from the 80s and 90s under Reagan and Clinton and so forth, as that begins to recede, the Mississippi controversy has local and state officials talking openly about how harmful locking up fewer people will be for the economy, confirming the suspicions you write of those who have argued that mass incarceration is not merely a strategy directed at crime prevention. This reminds me, Ryan, remember the old Twilight Zone where the aliens and that book at the end, and they say, and the book is called To Serve Mankind, and they realize at the end, oh, it's a cookbook. That kind of occurred to me here, that these folks down in these southern states are suddenly saying, wait a minute, this was never about crime. This is really about an alternate way of bringing in revenue to avoid having to raise taxes. Is that what your reporting was telling you down there in Mississippi?
Yeah, that's right, and the local officials are also talking quite openly about how this kind of exposes the state and the federal government's conservatism as bankrupt and as not true conservatism. Because let's say you're a Tea Party member and you're a supervisor of a county in Mississippi, you're not very impressed by the state legislators and the governor who are slashing taxes, slashing spending, and calling themselves conservatives, and then just forcing the counties to pick up the tab, which they do by raising property taxes and then by having prisoners pick up the labor. In other words, you've got prisoners picking up garbage, you've got them doing the groundskeeping for the schools, and and cleaning the highways, and all of these jobs that in the 70s and 80s or into the 80s were middle class jobs are now being done because the government's kind of trying to eliminate itself by this convict labor, and the supervisors, they call them supervisors down there, supervisors that I talk, basically county commissioners that I talk to, said, yeah, this is not conservatism. Don't pretend that this is conservatism.
I've been saying it for years. I hope you all stuck around and watched that. I really just wanted y'all to listen to that podcast I was listening to, because I've been saying that for years, but to wonder crazy, that ain't really what's going on, but it is.